All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, former Vice President Joe Biden, he's out with a new ad targeting President Donald Trump, is apparently not tough enough on China, after what my friend Joe Simonson remarked is one of the most obvious pivots in campaign messaging as a result of internal polling that he's ever seen. Let's take a look at the ad, which we'll discuss a lot today on Rising.
He failed to act. So now Trump and his allies are launching negative attacks against Joe Biden to hide the truth. Here are the facts. Joe Biden warned the nation in January that Trump had left us unprepared for a pandemic. Then, Biden told Trump he should insist on having American health experts on the ground in China.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on.
But Trump rolled over for the Chinese. He took their word for it.
The president tweeted, China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency.
China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very hard, and I think it's going to all work out fine.
Trump praised the Chinese 15 times in January and February as the coronavirus spread across the world.
It's a tough situation. I think they're doing a very good job.
Are you concerned about its potential impact on the global economy?
I think that China will do a very good job.
Trump never got a CDC team on the ground in China. And the travel ban he brags about? Trump let in 40,000 travelers from China into America after he signed it. Not exactly airtight. Look around. 22 million Americans are out of work, and we have more officially reported cases and deaths than any other country. Donald Trump left this country unprepared and unprotected for the worst public health and economic crisis in our lifetime. And now we're paying the price. All the negative ads in the world can't change the truth.
So let's take a second to digest this strategy. Joe Biden, who has spent decades appeasing the Chinese government in the U.S. Senate and the White House on the campaign trail, and whose son's company once took $1 billion loan from the Chinese government, wants to elevate the topic of China in the general election. It really takes an incredible amount of hubris and cognitive dissonance for his campaign to think that this is an effective strategy. Let's review, shall we? Let's look at where the polling stands right now. A Harris poll conducted earlier this month found 77% of Americans blame China for coronavirus. 71% say American companies should pull back manufacturing in China. 69% say they support Trump's tougher trade policies with China. And 54% say that China should pay reparations. On the first issue of blaming China, Biden is most disingenuous. Biden decried, quote, xenophobia after Trump announced a travel ban from China, and then somehow in his ad pivoted to attacking the Trump administration for allowing 43,000 people into the country after the ban was announced, as if that was weak. It turns out those 43,000 people were permanent residents and American citizens. So is he suggesting that these people will be barred from the United States? Something tells me that if they were there, it would have been a 2017 level travel ban freakout, and we would be hearing about it from the Biden campaign. On the second issue of repatriating American manufacturing, Biden is most vulnerable. Let's not forget that he literally began his campaign for president with this.
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. They can't even figure out how to deal with the fact that they have this great division between the China Sea and the mountains in the west. They can't figure out how they're going to deal with the corruption that exists within the system. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not competition for us.
He was a vocal proponent of China's 2001 entry into the World Trade Organization and gave it permanent normal trading relations with the United States. And let's just take a look at this chart of all manufacturing in the United States. Tell me how that worked out for American workers. Decade and a half later, he somehow found himself as Barack Obama's vice president, where he used to brag about how much time he spent with Xi Jinping. More importantly, was a massive proponent of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, literally serving as an Obama administration ambassador to sell it to the American people. Now, TPP would have been NAFTA on steroids. Even Hillary had good enough political sense to back away from the deal. Biden? Well, he says he would renegotiate it. And as viewers of this show know, this is a massive electoral liability, as it should be. The coronavirus crisis has not created anything new in our society. All it has done is reveal its most important flaws, and it's clear to literally all Americans, neoliberalism has created an impossible interdependence with the Chinese government. And one of the other things that this crisis has revealed is how the richest and most powerful among us have been able to play political games to ensure good outcomes for themselves as regular Americans scurry for pittances of direct payments and unemployment benefits. And what do you think those Americans are going to think when they learn more about how Biden's son took a $1 billion loan from the Chinese government while his father was in office? Recall, Hunter literally flew aboard Air Force Two to Beijing with Biden, later met with his business partner on that trip, and days later, a loan went through. And while Hunter was resigned from that board of that company, he still maintains a large equity stake in it. Does anyone in their right mind think that Hunter's company received such a massive windfall on his own merits? China is the Achilles heel of the Biden's campaign, and he's made a very foolish decision to try to remind Americans of where exactly he stands. And Crystal, I'm actually curious to see where you fall on this, because I saw a lot of criticism also from Biden from the left saying that he was embracing xenophobia. And it occurred to me that he's got the intersectional left that is mad at him. People saying, oh, he's going after China. Apparently didn't specify Chinese and Chinese government. Probably should have. That's something even the Trump campaign has done.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, any right-leaning scrutiny of the Biden record is going to turn up a whole host of problems for him electorally. And so I'm just like, who are you trying to please with this ad? Are you trying to appear tough? Because I think we all know that's not going to work out.
Right. I think you just look at it and you go, what are your actual principles?
Yes.
Because like you said, at the beginning, there was a lot of concern from Democrats and from the left about the China travel ban, and is this xenophobic? And I think that there are real reasons to be concerned about the impact of Asian Americans here from some of the rhetoric. So let's put that out. That I think that's legitimate. But it's more a question to me of political strategy. You can see how they're in such a bind because they're looking at that same polling. We talked about it here on the show. We're like, wow, this is like an 80%
literally
issue, which is why, of course, the Trump campaign jumped all over it and put out multiple ads from the campaign, from super PACs affiliated with the campaign, hitting Biden on his long record vis-a-vis China. So clearly they looked at that, and if you had a different political dynamic with a more dynamic candidate who was able to grab the news cycle, who had his own sort of social media and media apparatus at his disposal so that he could change the conversation, then they may not have to go down that road. But they know they can't really change the conversation. They have to deal with the hand that Trump is giving them. So they've decided, looking at that polling, to try to get to the right of him on China. But if this election is going to come down to who's tougher on China, they're not going to win that argument. Right. However you feel about the moral implications of that argument. And look, I think it's fair to say, especially at the beginning of this crisis, nobody was blameless here in terms of taking this seriously enough, taking the Chinese government at their word. Some of the things that Trump said were truly outrageous and should not have done. But to pretend like Joe was there from the beginning being tough on China is also absurd.
That's the other thing. Look, nobody's blameless in this situation. I was horrified, and I called him out on Twitter at the time. Anybody can go check the receipts of Trump saying all these nice things about China, taking their word for it, all of this early January and February. But that does not belie the fact that the man did start a multi-$100 billion trade war with China and basically fortified the American economy from a supply chain crisis like the one that we're dealing with right now, as much as they could in relation to what has been in the intertwinement that Biden has championed.
Well, and by the way, I think the timing on that, the deal that they came to, is also part of why this was tricky for Trump at that time, because they were trying to close those negotiations
January 15th.
right at the time when this was breaking out in China. That's not an excuse, but I do think that context is part of the backstory of what was going on there.
I think exactly. And again, like you said, this all goes back to his complete inability to drive the conversation. Because what does an actual candidate do? They go, oh man, I'm underwater as hell on this China issue.
Let's talk about something else.
My son Hunter took $1 billion loan.
Yeah.
Maybe we should cut an ad. You know what would be a better ad? I think a better ad would have just been talking about what I just said about praising China at that time in the early days and just keeping it there. Or you could just talk about general mismanagement in some of the early days and trying to cast, I don't necessarily agree with this. I think on the whole, it was a mixed bag, but going after the early response or going after some of the economic response, not calling it out. Have you seen a single ad or statement from Joe Biden decrying the economic bailout? I haven't. And yet we know the material conditions of Americans are slipping away every single day. 1/3 of people in April did not pay their rent. We know that the direct payments are only now hitting people's bank accounts. Who knows what debt is it? Consumer debt is at in this country. Commercial debt. Speaking to the woes and feelings of Americans. That's what a sensible candidate running against Trump would do. But now Trump is actually the one seizing upon that. That's his new strategy.
I mean, honestly, as I'm thinking about it, and we watch a lot of these I can't say I've watched 100% of them, but I've watched a lot of Joe Biden interviews to hear what he's going to say. I don't even really know what he thinks about the economic response. I don't know what he thinks it should have been. I don't know if he finds fault with what was passed. I presume not, since it was such a, everybody voted for it and everybody got behind it. Because that piece, increasingly, as hopefully, God willing, the pandemic subsides and we're left to focus on how to get people back to where they were economically, that piece is going to become more and more important. And now is the time to be the candidate who is getting out front on that, to be the candidate who sees the failures of this massive corporate bailout while small businesses didn't get nearly enough to get even the little bit of help that they were given. They didn't even have enough money in the kitty to get that done. Individuals forget about it. They've been left out on the cold, and millions of them struggling and failing to be able to get on the unemployment rolls. So if you were going to start to frame a new conversation, I think that's the one that you would really tackle. But he's been basically ideologically absent from that. I mean, I don't think Trump has done a very good job either in getting out front of those things. He's been sort of reactive. He's mostly just taken whatever Congress has given him, maybe added a few of his own insights here and there. But I actually think that lane is wide open. But I'm not sure that Joe really understands the sort of more economically populist position that is open to be claimed in that particular fight.
That's exactly it. And you're actually seeing Trump move into that, being like, you can't let people stay at home forever. People are dying. People are going to kill themselves out of depression. He's like, recession. I mean, that is language that is worker friendly, right? Being like, we need to make sure that these people are taken care of. I don't see that from Joe Biden. If anything, I'm seeing kind of this reactionary push from people like the governor of Michigan and Joe Biden, who are imposing some really draconian measures on people. And look, I don't even necessarily, I think some of these are ridiculous. Like, you can't buy seeds, and you can't.
Lawn and garden,
It's
calm
insane.
down. Yeah.
But but beyond that, it's like that. The response is no. He wants to let people out. Not we need to take care of people while they're on lockdown. This is a government-induced depression, which means that we need a government-induced solution, and nobody's actually working to give real relief to workers who are. I mean, in some cases, people are going to start going bankrupt. I mean, we already see Neiman Marcus, right? Just said they have indicated their intention to declare bankruptcy.
Wow.
That's one of the first great American companies. I mean, this is just going to keep going down the line. And remember, in bankruptcy, people lose their jobs, people lose their retirement accounts. I mean, people lose a lot of stuff. It gives workers, it really leaves them holding the bag. So we need to make sure that those people are taken care of. That's what the entire conversation should be about.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you, and I have, and for those of you who have lived in the industrial Midwest or in other towns that have seen, their industries move away, leaving this sort of empty, hollow core, your concern is that all of America is going to look like that. We were already in this retail apocalypse dynamic thanks to Amazon and other online retailers basically, crushing the suburbs, crushing so much of our retail outlets. This is just going to speed that decline. And I can tell you, it's not just an economic issue. It's also this is your community and your pride. And when you drive by these rotting hulks every day, it really does something, incredibly damaging to your psyche. And so that is the reality that confronts us. I'm not sure either of these candidates have really understood the inadequacies of the approach, have really laid it out in sort of a coherent message. And if you wanted to grab the conversation, that would be the correct moral and the correct political strategic approach. But I just don't think that Biden has the kind of strength in his campaign media apparatus or in his own facilities to be able to change that conversation. And so they're left with this. I did see Joe Scarborough out there tweeting about the Biden ad, like, this is the greatest ad of all time.
Well, congrats. Congrats to both Joes there. I'm looking forward to Crystal's radar next. But before we go, Crystal and I are starting some behind-the-scenes content on our Instagrams. Follow us both.
That's right. I'm Crystal M. Ball. You're Saagar, right?
Same as my Twitter. Easy to find. All right. I'm looking forward to her radar next.